Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I think we'll start in just a moment. Wait for a few more people to file in. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Justice, and I'm the Community Outreach Intern with MadiSUN. In just a moment, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Sam Deniski, who will be leading this presentation. The presentation will be about 30 minutes and will feature 3 of our installers, Arch Electric, Full Spectrum, and Midwest Solar. Then we'll leave time at the end for an open question session. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, though, feel free to put them in the chat, use the Q&A function or the raise hand function. And we are recording this. It will be posted to our events page if you wish to rewatch it or share any portion. And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Sam.
Thanks, Justice, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight on this lovely evening when you could be doing a lot more exciting and fun things outside. As Justice mentioned, I'm Sam Deniski. I'm the Distributed Resources Director here at Renew Wisconsin. So Renew Wisconsin is a renewable energy policy, advocacy, and programs nonprofit here located in Madison. We do renewable energy work across the state, and that includes administering the MadiSUN program. And we administer that program on behalf of the City of Madison, so this is an official city-led program. We have 3 programs sort of within the MadiSUN umbrella. That is the Backyard program. That is for nonprofits and affordable housing providers. It helps them with grants and information to go solar and to make those costs a little bit more accessible. We have a Solar for Business program as well for commercial solar customers. It offers a lot of the same things. We offer a grant and we offer educational services as well for businesses to install commercial solar installations. And we also have our group buy program, or also our residential program, which is probably why most of you folks are here tonight. And it's what our talk tonight, for the most part, is going to be on. And we're going to be talking a lot about residential solar. So the agenda on tonight's list is sort of why, or how solar works, excuse me, why it made sense even in a state like Wisconsin, and some of the economics as well, part of going solar. So we're going to be talking a lot about the group buy, a lot about residential solar. A lot of changes have come about in the last few years in terms of changes in panel technology, changes in price as well. So there's a lot to discuss. Solar is definitely something that's becoming a lot more accessible for a lot of homeowners across the Midwest and even beyond. I like to start out with this slide because this center photo right there, that is actually a photo of my dad and my parents' solar array, and that admittedly is not in Madison. In fact, it's not even in Wisconsin. It's actually in Minnesota. It's in northern Minnesota, and that's part of the reason why I like to start with this slide, is because it really demonstrates that solar can be done just about anywhere. So I always like to kind of start with that slide. Like I said, we're going to be talking tonight a little bit about, first off, how solar works. Then we're going to go into why it made sense, even in Wisconsin, and some of the economics around solar as well. And like Justice said, if you have questions throughout the talk, you can put them in the chat or you can put them in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get those answered either as they come about or at the end of the presentation as well. So I want to discuss a little bit about how solar actually works. I think a lot of us have at least some understanding of it, but I certainly want to make sure that everyone here is starting out at least at the same place. So we're going to go over kind of the main components of a solar array. And I think a lot of folks assume that, solar is a somewhat new technology, or it certainly has really grown and expanded a lot into becoming kind of more common in the last few years. And because of this, I think people think the technology is really advanced. I think people think there's a lot of equipment and components and things like that that go into it. And nothing could be further from the truth. Really the only two components that go into a solar array, or a solar system, I should say, are these two pieces of equipment right here: the solar module, which I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with, and the inverter. A lot of times now we're doing, our installers are doing micro inverters as well. So those are placed within the solar panel themselves. So what an inverter does is these solar panels create direct current, or DC electricity, and we need to change that to alternating current, or AC electricity. That's what most of the lights, appliances, electronics, and things like that in your home. That's the kind of electricity that they run on. So we need to convert that DC to AC, and that's what the inverter does, whether it be a box in your basement or your garage, or whether it be those micro inverters that are found on the solar panel itself. So the inverter kind of does the kind of behind the scenes work. It's not as obvious, obviously, as the solar panels are, but it certainly is a very important component of the system as well. The solar modules, of course, a little bit more obvious. They do kind of the upfront work, the heavy lifting. They convert the sunlight into electricity. Those little tiny squares that you see within the panel, those are called the solar cell. Most of the panels we use today have 72 of those cells. Some of the panels we use also are 60 cell panels as well. The only difference between the two is just the physical dimensions. So the 72 cell, the more common one, is typically about the size of a door. The 60 cell panel is about the same width, just a little bit smaller. I think it's like 5 feet for the smaller one versus about 7 feet for the larger one. There's no moving parts really in a solar module. It's a chemical reaction that takes place between two layers of silicon. So because there's no moving parts, there's really not a lot that can break down or wear out in a solar panel. I like to say, a lot of times when people ask, what kind of maintenance and things like that need to be done with the solar array, it's actually very little. You kind of just put the panels up there and almost forget about them to some extent. So because of that also, the solar panels typically have a pretty long shelf life. They can last 25 years. They're warranted for 25 years, but they can last quite a lot longer as well. So this is, the main component, of course, of the solar array. Again, the inverter, that does kind of behind the scenes work. Because there's a few more working parts to an inverter, these have a slightly shorter lifespan, or they certainly have shorter warranties. Folks might have to switch out an inverter during the lifespan of their solar array. If you're using micro inverters, of course, that's a little different. We can talk about the details behind that at the end as well. But the inverters definitely, like I said, do a lot of the behind the scenes work. They also typically now can connect to monitoring equipment. So you can have web apps, or you can have phone apps or websites that will actually tell you, how much electricity your array is producing. If you're a nerd like me, you can, tap in to see how much, how much electricity your solar array is making every day. My dad, who I showed you earlier, has only ever owned 2 cell phones in his entire life. One was a flip phone, and then he gave that up for an iPhone because that meant he could purchase an app and actually monitor his output. So if you're a nerd, there's definitely more things like that available as well on the inverter side of things. So this is kind of a demonstration of what the solar array looks like. So this is a typical house with solar on top of it, of course. There is the sun, of course. It creates electricity by striking the panels. Those panels, like I said, create DC electricity, or direct current. That then flows down here to your inverter, step 2. That inverter, of course, like I said, switches it to alternating current. And then from that point on, it flows into your electricity. It flows into your lights, your TVs, your appliances, et cetera, et cetera. Most of the arrays, I should say, nearly all of the arrays that are installed right now on residential homes are what we call grid tied arrays. And that means you're still connected to the grid. And that's really important for a lot of reasons. One being that it actually it makes for big lifestyle changes if you want to go off grid. A lot of people have fantasies of going off grid, and that's great. That is certainly an option. But it actually makes a lot more sense just to stay connected to the grid as well. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. But what happens is when your solar array produces more electricity than you need, typically that happens a lot during these kind of months, especially during the midday, the afternoon hours. That excess electricity flows back out through your meter and then onto the grid, and then it flows down to your neighbor's neighbor, et cetera, et cetera. And you will actually get a credit for that, and that's called net metering. We're going to talk about that in a little bit coming up as well. At times, when your solar array is not producing enough electricity to meet your home's needs, what you will do is you will take in electricity off the grid, and you, as the consumer or the user, will not notice any difference in your electricity reliability, in how you use your appliances and things like that. Your TV doesn't change whether it's getting its electrons from the sun or from coal or natural gas or wind or anything else. So another reason why a grid tied array is actually really important. It's much cheaper as well, and it really allows you to continue to kind of maintain a normal lifestyle, which is really important. So that's kind of how a grid tied array works. Definitely a lot more to go on than just that. But it's really important to kind of highlight just why a grid tied array is so great. And part of that is because of net metering. So a lot of people assume that, if you do a solar array, you're going to have to purchase a battery system for a backup as well. Battery backup is definitely an option now. The prices and the costs for batteries have come down quite a bit in the last few years, and they've continued to drop. But you don't need to have a battery backup in order to take advantage of all of the solar electricity that your array will produce. And the reason for that is called net metering. So like I said, when your solar array produces more electricity than you need, it's going to send that electricity back out onto the grid. And like I said, your meter will essentially capture those kilowatt hours that go out onto the grid and will kind of record a credit for you. And then when you, again, take electricity in off the grid at night or on cloudy days, when your solar array isn't producing enough electricity to meet your needs, then your meter will dial back forward again, just like it does now. And you simply will have to pay the utility for the net of that meter. That's why we call it net metering. So in a way, this is kind of net metering can kind of act as like a virtual battery. It's really great, especially from an economics perspective. Especially looking at it from your utility bills perspective, it's a really great way to utilize that excess solar that you produce that you're not using in real time. And there's a really good visual example that I have here. So this is the output from an actual solar array. And the area in green here is this person's solar production. The area in red is electricity that they take in from the utility. And then the blue area is sort of the overlapping part of that. So that's when this person's solar array, that's when this person's house is using the solar that they produce in real time. So as you can see, the area in blue is probably the smallest of those three areas. So it really demonstrates why net metering is so important. As you can see here, in the red, there's a lot of kind of dips and troughs, and that's when things like your refrigerator kick on, or maybe your air conditioner or something else kick on. Unlike that, your solar array actually produces really steady electricity throughout the day. So as you can see, around 7 in the morning, when the sun comes up, that solar array kicks on, it continues to increase, I should say, its production up until about noon or 1 o'clock or so. And then as the sun starts to set, that solar production drops off until it goes away completely when the sun sets. So as you can see, there's not a lot of opportunity here where this solar is being used in real time, which is why it's really great. Net metering basically allows us to take this area in green and kind of fill in the gaps where we see the red. So this is a really great way of being able to offset your electricity without actually having to purchase a battery to have for backup. So that's how that works. I want to move on and talk a little bit about what makes for a good solar ready home. We kind of talked about how solar works, but a major component to getting it to work is to have a good rooftop or a good location for your solar panels. So the first thing that we look at when we're assessing homes is your roof unshaded? This did not used to be the first thing that we looked at. The first thing that we used to look at used to be the direction. Did your roof face south, or did it face west or east or north? Now, shading is the most important thing that we look at. So if you have a roof that's not shaded by trees or other buildings, that's a really good sign that you'll have a good setup for solar. The second thing we look at is having a new-ish roof. The reason for that being that these panels, like I said, will last for a long time, 20, 30, maybe even 40 years. And that is as long or possibly longer than a typical shingle roof will last. And the reason that we suggest having a new roof or as new a roof as possible is because if you install solar and then halfway through the lifespan of that solar project have to have someone come and redo the roof, that's definitely going to cut into your return on investment time. It's going to increase that time by quite a bit. So we really encourage folks, if you have a roof that's 20 years old or older, definitely get that looked at, or at least maybe even get that replaced before doing your solar. The next thing that we look at is the direction. Still south is still best, of course, but with the increases in the panel efficiency and technology, and also with our net metering policies, east and west facing arrays are totally okay, especially if you don't have any shading on either of those sort of roof faces. And the last thing that we look at, and this really should not be overlooked, is an energy efficient home. The cheapest kilowatt hour you'll buy is the one you never have to produce or never have to offset, right? So if you have, old appliances in your home, if you have, a 20-year-old refrigerator, or if you have other things that are really big energy hogs, you want to replace those first. If you don't have to purchase as large of a solar array, you're going to end up saving a lot more money that way. So you definitely want to upgrade your home electronics, your home lighting, and things like that if those things are a little bit dated. So that kind of wraps up the first part of our presentation tonight. I just want to see if there's any questions in the chat. I can't really see them. So Justice, could you let me know if there's any questions? And if not, I'll just go on.
Yeah, Sam, I'm not seeing any questions, but I'll just remind folks you are welcome to put questions in the chat function, use the Q&A function, or use the raise hand function. All should be on the menu bar on your screen.
Great, thanks. So now we're going to talk a little bit about why solar actually makes sense in Wisconsin. And the first and foremost reason is solar has become quite affordable in the last 5 to 10 years or so. This graph here shows a representation of the solar cost, which is the yellow line, in relation to the amount of solar that has been installed. And those are those blue bars right there. So as you can see in the last decade, as we've installed more solar, the price has come down precipitously, anywhere from about 75% for residential installations to 90% or even more for some commercial and for utility scale sized solar installations. A lot of this is, of course, due to things like economies of scale. Countries like South Korea, China, Germany, producing panels in mass. And a lot of it also is just due to increases in efficiency as well. My colleague actually brought in some old panels from his home, which are, I think he said about 10 years old. And those panels are only 190 watts each. Now, the panels that we are doing are anywhere from about 320 watts each to about 370 watts each. So that just means, you just have to buy less amount of panels in order to offset, the same amount of electricity. So those are a couple of the reasons why solar has been able to come down in price so much over the last 10 years or so. Another reason why solar makes sense in Wisconsin is it's actually really reliable. You kind of saw that graph earlier showing how consistent the solar energy production is, especially on a day like today when we have some pretty good sunshine. But the panels themselves are actually really tough. They're kind of a hard tempered plastic. They can withstand some pretty decent sized hail. They can withstand some pretty strong, windstorms and wind gusts as well. The other kind of meteorological phenomena that folks are concerned about, especially in this part of the country, is snow. And it's true, if you get snow on those panels, especially a heavy snow, the panels are not going to produce electricity, sometimes for a few days or so. Especially if we get a heavy snowstorm followed up quickly by a really cold snap, and that snow can't melt and slide off. But the good thing is, for the most part, eventually the panels will melt and shed that snow. The panels are almost always at some sort of an angle. If you have a steeply pitched roof, your panels are probably going to melt and shed snow a little bit faster. But they're always at an angle. They're always running a little bit hot, just because there's electricity kind of constantly flowing through them, at least to some degree. And of course, they're a darker color as well. So typically they're going to heat up a little bit faster and melt that snow a little bit quicker. Another reason why solar is really great is because it creates jobs. We just had a job report come out actually last week. Wisconsin's solar jobs held steady, thankfully, last year through the pandemic, when a lot of other states and nationally solar jobs were down. But these jobs are really important because they simply cannot be outsourced. You really need folks in your communities installing these arrays. You need boots on the ground, and that's what these kind of projects do. They definitely create and sustain jobs. In that photo right there is our own Michael Reuter, who is on the call tonight. So just want to give him a little shout out there, but really important to not overlook the importance of the job creation factor. Another important aspect I certainly want to highlight to talk about is the value that it will add to your home. So this is a study that was done from NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Colorado. This is not a Midwest study. I'm going to say that right now, but it showed that solar powered homes sold faster and for more money than an equivalent home. So basically what that means is, let's say you and your neighbor are both selling your home at the same time. They're about the same age, about the same size, worth about the same amount. Your home is going to sell for faster and for more money than your neighbor's. And the reason for that simply is that home's electric bill is going to be significantly lower than the other home's electric bill. So it definitely adds money to your home. It cannot be assessed for a higher amount as well, which is great. So it really is a way for you to increase the value of your home and kind of that part of your value of your net worth as well. So that's about all I have for that part of it. And now we're going to move on to kind of the exciting portion of the talk that I think everybody is interested in. We want to know the price, right? So we're going to go over some economics and some incentives as well. I want to talk first about some of the incentives. So the first one that I want to talk about is through the statewide Focus on Energy program. If you are not familiar with Focus on Energy, I definitely encourage you, after this presentation is done, to Google Focus on Energy. They have a ton of energy efficiency programs, one of which being rebates for solar installations. They also have things like everything from rebates to solar to things like free light bulbs and other things like that. If you qualify, there is a $500 rebate for Focus on Energy for a solar installation. If you live in a rural zip code, I'm not sure if that applies to anyone, you can get up to $1,000 as well. So this is definitely an incentive or a rebate that folks should should take advantage of. There are some qualifying criteria for this rebate, however. Your home has to be located within 90 degrees of due south, which basically means it has to be everything from due west all the way down to due south and then kind of back to due east. And also, your home has to be less than 10% shaded. So there are some qualifying criteria, but if you meet that, that is a good source for some incentives to reduce the cost of your array. The other big way to reduce that upfront cost, or at least to lower your out-of-pocket cost, maybe is the better way to say this, is through the solar investment tax credit. So this is a tax credit that has been on the books for several years. Back in 2019, the tax credit was actually at 30%. It got reduced last year down to 26% and was scheduled to get reduced even further this year. But thankfully, late in 2020, Congress passed an extension on this tax credit, and it was signed by President Trump. So now that 26% tax credit has been passed on to this year, and it will continue through 2022 as well. And then it kind of resumes its schedule of ramping down in 2023. It will go down to 22%. And then unless something changes and Congress acts it in to extend those credits or possibly even increase them, they'll go away for residential installations in the year 2024. They do stay at 10%, however, for commercial and utility scale solar installations after that point as well. Definitely, though, something to consider. The tax credit will come obviously after your solar project is built and commissioned. It's just, as far as I know, it is just an amendment that you file to your income taxes when you do those each spring. So something to think about there. If you do not pay in enough in federal taxes, you can roll that over from year to year. So let's say you are going to receive $3,000 for a federal tax credit, and you only paid in $1,000, you would be able to get that $1,000 back the first year, and then you can roll over the remainder for the year after, or even the year after that. And as far as I know, you can continue to kind of roll that over indefinitely as well. So that's a really big source of income that you can use to kind of offset those expenses or reduce your out-of-pocket costs, maybe is the better way to say that. So now that we kind of have those two main incentives and rebates under our belt, we can perform what I call a cost exercise. So the average size of a solar array kind of in the Madison-Dane County area is typically about 5 kilowatts. However, every system is sized specifically for each individual house. We usually do that, we do that strictly through looking at your electric use or your electric consumption. So everybody's house is going to be a little different. It doesn't necessarily matter how big or small your house is. It matters how much electricity you use. But a typical, or an average, I guess I should say, is the better way to say that, 5 kilowatt array through our program is going to be about $14,500. If you qualify for the Focus on Energy rebate, that takes another $500 off. If you also qualify or apply the 26% federal tax credit on top of that, that reduces it by another $3,600. And that leaves you with an out-of-pocket cost, if we're using that hypothetical 5 kilowatt array system, at about $10,000. So it reduces it by quite a bit. Every installation, of course, is going to be a little different. Some will qualify for Focus on Energy rebates, some will not. The bigger the system, the more expensive the system. Obviously, you will be getting more money back there through the tax credit. But this is just sort of a very generalized cost exercise to give you some ideas as to how much an array might cost. Are there any questions in the chat there?
None
Or in
that
the Q&A?
our installers have been doing a great job of answering folks in the chat, but if you want, I can read them out
Oh, great.
loud
Thanks,
just in
guys.
case everyone wants to hear the answers.
No, I was just wondering if anyone, if anyone has any questions specifically on the cost exercise, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you. Maybe, hopefully, I think I
Yeah,
forget
yep,
actually how
we
it
can do
works.
that.
So if there are any questions about this, definitely raise your hand or let us know. If not, we can kind of go into the next slide here. I just want to see how I'm doing for time. Okay, doing still pretty good. I just saw in there, are there financing options? Yes, we do have two options for financing. I really should put a slide up on this. Justice, if you could put those links to those two financing options in the chat, that would be great. One of them is through Green Penny Bank. The other is through the Clean Energy Credit Union. They both offer pretty good rates for solar specific loans. There's lots of different ways to pay for these installations. You can pay for them through a solar loan. A lot of folks do a home refinance, line of credit as well. And then some folks just, pay with cash or with savings or something like that. It's completely up to you how you want to pay for that. But those are just a few of the options, or I should say probably the three most common options that most folks use. So, now that we kind of know the cost of our solar array, we can calculate a value of that. So if we take that same sort of average 5 kilowatt solar array and apply it to our electric rates, we can calculate an annual cost savings. So most folks are probably in MG&E territory. That is the 13 plus, I think it's 13.6 cents per kilowatt hour. If you are in Alliant territory, you're probably paying about 12 cents per kilowatt hour. And if you're in a municipal utility like a Sun Prairie or a Wanapee, you're probably paying about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So if we take that 5 kilowatt array, multiply it by the average amount of sunny hours that we get in a year, we can figure out how many kilowatt hours that array is going to produce, and thus how many kilowatt hours and the cost of that it will offset. So if you're in MG&E territory, that hypothetical 5 kilowatt array is going to save you over $800 per year. If you're in Alliant territory, it's going to save you about $720 per year. And if you're in municipal territory, it's going to save you about $600 per year. So good news and bad news for MG&E folks. You typically pay higher electric rates throughout the year, but it does mean that your solar array might actually have a slightly faster payback period as well. Obviously, these are just hypothetical calculations, but we can do a relatively easy cost exercise once we know the general size of your array as well. Now, with that, we know that we can sort of apply that, average savings per year to the total cost of our array. So again, if we kind of take the MG&E customer with that typical 5 kilowatt array, it's going to take you about 10 years to pay off, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depending on, what kind of weather patterns we get, how you consume your electricity, and things like that. If you switch to something called a time of use rate with MG&E, you can actually reduce that time, that payback period, even more. You can get it down to 7 or 8 or 9 years. Again, these are just kind of ballpark figures. I don't want people to take these, too strongly, because it can certainly vary a lot depending on, like I said, everything from how much sunshine we get during the course of a year or multiple years, to how you use your electricity as well. Time of use rate, just to let you know, that is a rate you can sign up for, in which, and I believe Alliant has this as well, where you will get charged a different rate depending on the time of day. Typically, you will get charged a higher rate during the day and the afternoon times. That's when typically most people, the grid is using the most electricity. So that's why they kind of charge you more to sort of hopefully have you curtail that use. And then they charge you a lesser amount if you use electricity at nights and in the mornings and things like that. So that's why, that's how that time of use rate works. So if you, switch to that and you have solar, you'll do things like, only run your dishwasher at night, or only do laundry in the morning, or things like that. Essentially, though, even with regular payback rates, this can equate to as much as $20,000 in savings over a 30-year solar array or solar project lifespan. So, if we think that the solar array is going to last for 30 years, if we pay it off in 10 years, or if that solar array, I should say, pays for itself in 10 years, we get about 20 years or maybe even more of that $800 savings. And this is not even taking into account the fact that electric rates will probably rise as well over the next few years. So that kind of sums up the cost and the economics part of this. Are there any questions? If not, we can kind of skip ahead to the steps to installing. So this is what most folks, this is kind of the steps that most folks take when they're going to do a solar array. The first step, I should say, is a phone call with us at MadiSUN. I should say the first part would actually be signing up through our I'm Interested page. Justice can put that in the chat as well. I assume you've all done that. But if you haven't, that is step sort of point one. The next would be a phone call with us. We'll discuss your electric use. We'll take a look at your roof with satellite pictures and things like that. And we'll give you some estimates on system size, cost, and the rebates that you might be able to qualify for. It will just be sort of a preliminary call. What we do is we kind of just give you some ballpark figures to see if it's like a doable cost, and if that all seems to work out for you. If it doesn't, we can make some recommendations. If it does, we can schedule a site assessment with one of our 3 contractors here, or potentially with all 3 of them. At that point, our contractors will do a more in-depth evaluation. They'll take a look at your roof. They'll take a closer look at your electric use as well. And then they'll go over some of the finer details in terms of their equipment and some other array sizes and things like that. After that, they will issue you a proposal that will nail down the specific size and type of your array. It'll also kind of give you some information about the layout and other details as well. It'll of course give you a much more exact figure on cost and the rebates that you'll be able to qualify for. From that point on, if you are still interested, that proposal will eventually become a contract. After you sign the contract and some time passes, your solar array will be installed. Ironically, this whole process can take anywhere from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, but the actual construction of the solar array typically takes a day or 2, and sometimes, maybe even less, sometimes only just a few hours, depending on how difficult of an install it is. So with that, I have been talking for far too long. So I want to first open up the floor and introduce our installers. We have Nick on the line. Hi, Nick from Full Spectrum Solar. We have Stanley on the line as well from Arch Electric. And last but certainly not least, we have Michael Reuter from Midwest Solar. So I want to, first of all, thank all you guys for joining. And please feel free to correct me if I have said anything wrong. I'm sure I probably did, especially on the technical parts, and that's why you all are here. But just want to turn the floor over to you guys if you have anything you want to say quick. Otherwise, we will open it up for the Q&A session.
As always, I think you did a great job, Sam. I came in a little bit late, so maybe I missed some of the technical snafus, but looks good from here.
Yeah, I was just going to mention the tempered plastic is tempered glass.
Thank you.
That's the only,
yes.
I was going to email you, but since you asked, that's the only thing I saw. And you got to get a picture of some microinverters in that presentation. But other than that, it was awesome as always.
Yes, we do. Thank you very much. Okay.
Nick, I think you're muted. I think Nick was trying to say something.
Oh, sorry.
From Full Spectrum.
There you are, Nick.
Oh, we can't hear you.
He is muted.
This is our life now, Nick.
Well, we'll let Nick try to work out his audio, but yeah, I just want to open the floor up for questions, especially for our installers. Justice, are there any questions in the chat? Or I guess you can just kind of start or unmute people, however, in whatever order they came in.
Yeah, certainly. I'll just say I did allow all of our attendees to unmute themselves. So if you want to raise your hand, you are welcome to speak your question. But first we have a question from Robert. I do not currently have an electric car, but certainly would like one. Can your team plan for that? It feels a bit guessy as the technology and prices are changing so fast. Follow-up question. Also guessy is Biden's infrastructure plan. Have you seen any provisions in that for solar installs for homeowners?
I could take the electric car one. I mean, we would definitely be happy to include a car charger as part of a solar install, but to be completely transparent about it, like most electricians are capable of running a 240 volt if it's an outlet or whatever the case may be. So if you're not sure when you're going to buy it, or you might, not buy an EV, you don't have to feel like this is your only opportunity to do it. It's usually, a few hundred to, I can't see it. Most car chargers aren't going to run you more than $1,500 installed unless you have a really complex, massive house. On the infrastructure plan, I mean, it's hard to imagine there being much more than 26% of the cost of the system covered by a tax credit. I'd consider anything beyond that to be excellent, but I have not heard any rumblings of extra residential solar incentives at this point.
Yeah, did on Stanley's answer. I mean, typically, if someone's talking about adding an electric vehicle, if they know what they want and they're ready to buy in the next 3 to 6 months, and they say, I'm going to get a Mach-E and I'm going to drive 8,000 miles a year, that's great. I can plan for that. But if you're unsure and you're saying, well, in the next 5 years, I'll have an EV, I agree with Stanley. It's best to wait. We don't, a charger can always be added at a later date. So.
Yeah, and one other thing that I would add to that too is, a lot of the vehicle charging by most folks is done, at home and at night. There's a big push, and it's really fun and cool to talk about, DC fast chargers and the Tesla chargers that'll charge up your car from nothing to, full in, 20 minutes or less. But it's really important to remember that, most of the days you're gonna come home from work or whatever, park your car, plug it in. Sometimes, you might actually plug it in and wait, like I said, especially if you're on that time of use rate, wait until, it's nighttime or after you go to bed to actually have that power kick in. But, that's when most of the charging is going to happen, and you really don't need any special infrastructure at this point to do that. It can certainly speed up the time, of course, but for the most part, yeah, I think I agree with what Stanley and Michael said too. And also, unfortunately, on the residential solar front, there is really not a lot there, sadly, for solar installations on the residential level outside of the 26% tax credit. We were actually just really excited to see those get extended for a couple more years, just to kind of give these folks a way to plan ahead. Because last year there was a lot of solar that got installed. The year before there was a lot that got installed also, mainly because of the kind of the thought or the fear that those tax credits would be going away or would be getting reduced.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Next question is from Angie, who asked, what's the average savings with the group buy program versus purchasing a system on your own?
It's not 50% off, if that's what you're wondering. It's honestly, it's a pretty modest discount. I think that it is part of the value, and I think each of the contractors probably have priced things their own way. But one of the biggest things in going through the group buy is you're actually supporting Renew Wisconsin. And if you haven't learned much about them, I mean, I don't know that any of us would have jobs if Renew hadn't been doing the work they've done for, what is it, 20, how many years? 20,
30 years
30
this year,
years?
Stanley.
Okay, great. So I'm good
It's
at
our
math.
30th anniversary this year.
I'm great at math. Let me answer all your energy problems. But so that the discount, you know, I think Angie, honestly, I think I might have sent your proposal outside of the group buy, but we would gladly have you in the group buy and offer the same discount we would anyone else. It kind of comes down to your system parameters, exactly how much that discount's going to be though for us.
Yeah, and before I forget, sorry, this is a little off topic. Can you guys all put your email addresses in the chat as well, so folks have access to those? I know last time we did that kind of right at the end, and I wasn't sure if everyone had a chance to write those down or copy those over. But thanks. Yeah, the just like Stanley said, the discount is, you know, it's fairly modest, especially this year. But the big components of the group buy are still in effect, and that is, you know, we select these folks here because we know their experience. They're going to do a great job, and they're going to do everything perfectly, and they're going to know exactly how, you know, permitting and all that other stuff works. And then, of course, we also provide these sorts of education sessions as well. I know Justice has spent several hours on the phone just in the last 2 weeks talking with folks and letting them know all the ins and outs in solar. So that's another big part of the group buy as well. Anything to add to that on the pricing, Michael or Nick?
No, yeah, I mean, I think we offer a very competitive price for what I would consider a pretty premium product spec. So, I mean, that's one of the things, and we're offering that to, you know, all of our customers at any system size. There's bracketing that happens to an extent, but yeah, I mean, a huge part of this is supporting Renew, and this education piece that's happening right now is a big part of it as well. So.
We still can't hear you, Nick. Is it the app? If you click unmute on the app, will it help you? It looks like you're trying to connect audio. Do you know sign language? I can spell. That's all I can do. I can say hello. Sorry, man.
Oh, poor Nick. Eventually, we're gonna have to stop doing these by Zoom, and I'm gonna really be happy for that day.
Go.
But for now, we still have to deal with these. How are we doing on time? We still have a few minutes left. Definitely invite any more questions. You know, again, if you'd like to, if it's a complicated question, you want to unmute yourself, by all means, go ahead. Yeah, just kind of leave it open here. And if there are any questions, I feel like I had a question for you guys that I had written down, and now I can't remember what it is. I was hoping to have a couple teed up for you, but I forget what they are now.
Well, Sam, I'd take an opportunity if folks are still thinking about questions, just to mention that, you know, you have 3 really good options in this group buy. Like if I didn't work at Arch, I would consider either of these 2 installers for my house. We're all a little bit different. We're all built differently and all of that. But I would say if you get bids from outside of the group buy and they're trying to convince you that you need to decide tonight, that's a red flag. Like, you should be able to take 6 months, a year, 3 years. I've had customers take 7 years to pull the trigger. Like, you're spending $15,000, $30,000. Like, go with someone that's quality and go with someone that's going to like treat you right. And that's what I love about the group buy. And we haven't been able to participate in the past. And that's why we are excited to be part of it now, is that you know that you're getting good straight shooting installers, I guess, with any of us. So frenemies, is that the word? Cooperation? I don't know. I like all these guys.
I'll take frenemies.
Yeah. Yeah. I want us all to be so busy that we can't stand it, I think is how I usually put it. So far, that's been the case this spring. So.
Okay.
We do.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, we did get another question.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Yeah. One from Peter. Are most systems installed with the capacity to use solar during a grid outage, auto transfer switch, or is that more of an add-on?
That would be an add-on. Yeah, if you were trying to use your system off grid, that's something outside of the group buy program pricing. Most grid tied systems, or I should say all grid tied systems, are designed to shut down when the grid goes down. That's part of their UL 1741 listing. So if the grid is out, your system's down as well. You know, that's for the safety of the line workers and anyone else that might be involved in bringing the grid back up. Because if you don't have a way to cut power between your home PV system and the power going back out to the utility lines, that could be feeding a circuit that the utility expects is dead. That's also part of the reason why we install utility or interconnection disconnect switches or PV system disconnect switches, depending on what utility you're working with, how you term it. But so that the utility could shut your system down, or that a firefighter or a first responder could shut your system down. So if you want to install an automatic transfer switch and a battery in an off-grid system or a battery backup system, it's certainly a possibility, but it's outside of the program.
Yep. Yeah, if you're not putting a battery in, your system's going to be designed to shut down. We definitely are offering batteries. There's not a huge financial benefit to them. I mean, there really is none in Wisconsin. So it needs to be something that you either want to be like supporting the next wave of energy innovation by being an early adopter. And like, if you're the type of person that's proud to pay a little extra to support the growth of the next big thing, batteries are great. But otherwise, yeah, I try to mention it to every person I talk to, because most people think the sun is shining, I have solar, I should be able to power my house. And it's unfortunately, like Michael said, just a safety thing for the line people and things like that.
So I did have one question for you all, and that is, what would you estimate is your current wait time? If one of these good people signed up tonight, they got an assessment, so shortly thereafter, about how long until they actually have a functioning solar array on top of their house?
Which utility and which permitting authority? I mean, it can be, I mean, we're booking out, I think, what are we at, about 10 to 12 weeks right now out? And really a lot of that time is just waiting on the utilities to process their approvals, waiting on the permitting to be approved and things like that. But as you mentioned in your presentation, once you get past that point, it's usually a 2 or 3 day install tops for most residential systems. And, I think all the installers will keep you informed as the process moves through. We've got some cool tools we've rolled out to do that, to help us do that. But, I think every installer worth their salt they're going to make sure that they're taking care of all the paperwork and doing all that for you. So you just kind of get to sit and wait for them to show up. You don't have to be following up with permitting or anything like that.
Yeah, we're probably scheduling into mid-August right now. So, that's our target, but it's always moving as people sign more contracts and more people get signed up. That date changes and shifts, but we're committed to making sure that everyone that comes into the program in the defined timeline will get their installation before the end of the year. So.
And I'll just say, Nick put in the chat that Full Spectrum's wait time is about 2 to 3 months. But if you're with Alliant, add a month onto that.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I think we've answered a lot of questions tonight. I really appreciate the installers here for being on tonight and for answering these questions and for helping us out. Again, the webinar is recorded and it will be put online hopefully by tomorrow, or if not, very soon after. And there are other webinars as well that are coming up, and we hope to maybe even have 1 or 2 in-person outdoor sessions later this summer as well. So would definitely like to see you guys in person.
Oh, Sorry.
We have some interest. So I just want to thank
news.
all of our attendees tonight. If there are other questions that, come to you later on, later tonight, tomorrow, a week from now, you have access now to folks' emails, and you can certainly email any of us with those questions as well. So I just want to thank again everyone for being here tonight, and say farewell.
Thanks, everybody.